The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary still hung faintly in the air, a pleasant ghost of the lively dinner we just finished. Our friends, the Hendersons and the Clarks, had finally trickled out into the cool night, their laughter echoing down the driveway before being swallowed by the chirping of crickets. Now, the only sounds were the rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall and the low hum of the refrigerator. My husband, Tom, was starting to do what I called his power-down sequence. He donned a big, theatrical gesture and stretched his arms over his head. "Well, Carol, that was a good one. You really outdid yourself with that apple crisp." He patted his stomach contentedly. "I'm heading up. Don't you two stay up all night solving the world's problems." "We'll try not to," I said, smiling as he kissed the top of my head. He gave his old college buddy, David, a friendly clap on the shoulder. "Night, Dave. Don't let her talk your ear off." "Night, Tom," David replied, his voice a low, gentle rumble. And then it was just the two of us. David had been Tom's best friend since they were 19. He was a permanent fixture in our lives, the quiet, steady best man at our wedding, the godfather to our son, the familiar, comforting presence at countless holidays and Sunday barbecues. He was a bachelor, a history professor at the local university, and he had a way of observing the world with a kind of thoughtful stillness that was the complete opposite of my Tom's boisterous energy. I started gathering the last of the dessert plates, the ones with sticky remnants of cinnamon and oats. "Can I get you another coffee, David? Or maybe something a little stronger?" He was sitting in Tom's favorite armchair, the one with the worn leather and the slight sag on the left side. He looked at the empty snifter in his hand. "A little more brandy might be nice, if you have it." "Of course." I went to the sideboard and poured a small measure of the amber liquid into his glass. The house felt cavernous now that the boisterous energy of our friends was gone. The rain had started to drum a steady rhythm against the window panes, a soft, lulling sound that usually made me feel cozy. But tonight it felt different. The quiet wasn't just peaceful. It was heavy with unspoken things, like the air before a storm. When I handed him the glass, our fingers brushed. It was nothing, a fleeting touch, but his eyes met mine, and he held my gaze for a moment longer than usual. There was a depth in them I hadn't noticed before, a hint of melancholy. "You and Tom have built a wonderful life, Carol," he said softly, swirling the brandy in his glass. "Truly, this house, your family, it's the real deal." I smiled, settling onto the sofa opposite him. "Well, we try. It's not always easy, you know how it is. 40 years is a long time." I laughed a little. Sometimes I look at him snoring in that chair, and I wonder who that old man is. David didn't laugh. He just watched me, his expression serious. "He's a good man, Carol. A better man than most people realize." The comment hung in the air between us. It was a simple statement, but the way he said it felt significant, weighted. Of course Tom was a good man. I knew that. I'd married him. But David's tone suggested a different kind of knowledge, a depth I wasn't privy to. "I know he is," I said, my voice a little quieter now. He took a slow sip of his brandy, his eyes looking past me, toward the darkened window where his own reflection stared back. "Do you remember about 30 years ago? When Michael was, about 10? Tom was working at that engineering firm downtown. Hated the commute, hated his boss." I nodded slowly, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. "I remember. It was a tough year. He was so stressed." I remembered the long hours, the way he'd come home looking drained, his shoulders slumped. I'd tried to be supportive, to make home a sanctuary for him. but I always felt like there was a part of his frustration he kept walled off, even from me. He was miserable, David confirmed, his voice barely a whisper. But he had a way out, an incredible one. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, the glass cupped in both hands. The lamplight cast deep shadows across his face, making him look older, more serious than I'd ever seen him. The rain beat a little harder against the glass, and the grandfather clock began to chime, marking the midnight hour. Each chime felt like a hammer blow, punctuating the heavy silence that had fallen between us. He opened his mouth to continue, and I had the sudden chilling premonition that whatever he was about to say was going to change everything. David took a deep breath, the sound barely audible over the rain. "There was a job offer," he said, his gaze fixed on the swirling liquid in his glass. Not just any job offer. It was from a new tech firm out in California. Palo Alto. They were at the forefront of everything, doing groundbreaking work. They wanted Tom to lead a new research and development team. It was his dream job, Carol. The kind of work he talked about since we were in college. More money than we could have imagined back then. A chance to really build something. I stared at him, my mind racing. California? A dream job? I searched my memory, trying to place this. I remembered the stress of that time, the complaints about his boss, but this was a blank. Tom had never mentioned a job offer in California. Not once. I don't understand, I stammered. He never told me. No, David said quietly. He never told you. He knew you wouldn't have stood in his way. You would have packed up this whole house. You would have said goodbye to your friends. You would have left your garden, and you would have gone with him. You would have done it for him. He looked up at me then, and the sadness in his eyes was so profound it felt like a physical blow. But he wouldn't let you. The room felt like it was shrinking. The air grew thick and hard to breathe. I could hear my own heartbeat, a frantic, muffled drum against my ribs. He came to me, David continued, his voice low and steady, a lifeline in the sudden turmoil of my thoughts. We sat in a bar, not unlike this, and he laid the whole thing out. The offer, the opportunity. He was electric with excitement. For about 10 minutes. Then he went quiet. He just stared into his beer and said, "But Carol?" He paused, letting the words sink in. "But Carol," he repeated softly. He said, "Carol's mother is getting frail. She needs her daughter close by. Carol's whole life is here. Her garden is her sanctuary. Her friends are her sisters. If I take her away from all that, what am I really giving her? A bigger house? More money? It would be like pulling a flower up by its roots just to put it in a fancier pot. She'd wilt." I couldn't speak. A cold wave washed over me, starting at my feet and rising until it settled in my chest, a block of ice. I thought of my mother's final years, how grateful I was to be just 10 minutes away, to be there for her every day. I thought of my garden, the one I had painstakingly cultivated for decades, the soil I had turned with my own hands. I thought of my friends, the women who had seen me through every joy and sorrow. My life. The life I had always thought we just settled into. He turned them down, David said, his voice thick with emotion. He told them he had family commitments he couldn't break. He never even gave them a chance to make a counteroffer. He came home that night, and he told you he'd decided to stick it out at his old job, that things were looking up. It was a lie. He stayed in that job he hated for another 3 years, until he could find something else here, something local. He did it so you wouldn't have to give up your world. He chose your happiness over his own ambition, and he decided you should never have to carry the weight of that choice. I sat there, frozen, utterly and completely frozen. It wasn't a cold of fear or anger. It was a cold of shock, of a sudden, shattering revelation that recast the entire landscape of my marriage. 40 years of shared memories, of jokes, of arguments over trivial things, of comfortable silences. It all suddenly looked different. The man I thought I knew inside and out, the predictable, steady Tom who grumbled about his commute and loved my apple crisp, was a stranger. He was a man who had been carrying a secret sacrifice, a monumental act of love, for 30 years, and he had never said a word. The foundation of my world hadn't cracked. It had just revealed itself to be deeper and more profound than I had ever imagined. The image of him, my husband, sleeping soundly upstairs, suddenly felt impossibly distant, like a figure from a story I was only just now beginning to understand. The grandfather clock in the hall seemed to be ticking louder now, each second marking a moment of my ignorance. David sat watching me, his expression full of a gentle, shared sorrow. He hadn't told me this story to cause pain, I realized, but to deliver a truth he felt I deserved to know. He had been the keeper of my husband's greatest secret, the silent witness to an act of profound devotion. My throat was tight. When I finally found my voice, it was a reedy whisper. Why are you telling me this now, David?" He sighed, a long, weary sound, and set his empty glass on the coaster. "Because we're not getting any younger, Carol. Tom would never tell you. It's not in his nature. He thinks it would be selfish, that it would sound like he was asking for gratitude. But I watch you too. I see the comfort, the routine. It's beautiful. But I think, sometimes, we forget the choices that built the comfort. I see him look at you when you're not paying attention, when you're laughing with your friends or tending to your roses. The love is still there, so deep. I thought you should know the full measure of it." He stood up, his tall frame seeming to fill the quiet room. "I should go. It's late." I rose on shaky legs, my body feeling disconnected from my mind. I walked with him to the door in a daze. The rain had softened to a fine mist. The air that drifted in was cool and smelled of wet earth and night-blooming jasmine from the trellis by the porch. "Thank you, David," I managed to say, and the words felt ridiculously small for the gift he had just given me. He just nodded, gave my arm a gentle squeeze, and walked out into the night. I watched his car's taillights disappear down the street before I softly closed and locked the door. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, my eyes closed. Frozen. That's what he'd left me. Not with coldness, but with a stunning, crystalline stillness. The routines, the small annoyances, the comfortable predictability of my life with Tom. It all felt different. It wasn't a life we had settled for. It was a life he had actively, silently chosen. For me. Slowly, I made my way through the darkened house. The familiar creak of the third step on the staircase sounded like a note from a forgotten song. I pushed open our bedroom door. The soft moonlight filtered through the blinds, tracing silver stripes across the duvet. Tom was fast asleep, lying on his side, one arm flung over the pillow where my head should have been. He was making that soft, rumbling snore I sometimes teased him about. I didn't see the man who left his socks on the floor or forgot to take out the recycling. I saw a young man in a bar, his heart torn between a brilliant future and the woman he loved. I saw the quiet strength it must have taken to walk away from his dreams to protect mine. All those years I thought he was just content. He was actively cultivating my happiness, tending to it as carefully as I tended my garden. I walked over to his side of the bed and looked down at his face, softened by sleep. The lines around his eyes and mouth were maps of a life I thought I knew completely. But now I saw new roads, new territories I had never explored. An overwhelming wave of love washed over me, so powerful and fierce it almost brought me to my knees. It was a love renewed, deepened, and redefined. I didn't wake him. The secret wasn't mine to confront. It was his to keep. The knowledge was enough. I slipped into bed beside him, careful not to disturb him. I lay there in the quiet dark, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, the steady beat of the heart of the man who had silently built our world on a foundation of his own sacrifice. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt like I was truly home.